Okay, so once again, welcome everyone. Nice to have you all here. And tonight I'm going to talk about the idea of freedom. And as part of that, I'm going to also talk a little bit about addiction. Someone wanted to hear about addiction and how Buddhist path might help people who have addiction problems. And it fits quite well with the idea of freedom. So freedom is going to be like the overarching topic, and then coming within that will be the idea of addiction. And the reason why it fits quite well is because if you are addicted, you are not free. Yeah, kind of addiction is one of those imprisonments in life, and so how can we see these things together, so to speak? So freedom, why do we want to talk about freedom? Very often in Buddhism we talk about the purpose of the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, as happiness. Freedom from suffering, moving towards happiness. And sometimes I think that is a very powerful way of thinking about the Dhamma. And it is the main way that the Buddha teaches about the goal and the purpose of Buddhism. And there is a reason for that, because happiness and suffering is something we all can relate to fairly easily. But it is not the only way of thinking about the purpose of the path. There are many other ways that are, in a sense, give a broader understanding of what the Dhamma really is about. And when you bring all of these ideas together, the various ways of thinking about the goal of Buddhism, it broadens out our understanding, it broadens out our picture of what these teachings really are about. And sometimes people say, oh, happiness is such kind of a shallow thing. It's not really profound. Why should you search for happiness? There must be more important things in the world than happiness. And very often people think that happiness means something superficial. Someone running around and jumping up and down, or someone indulging in the pleasures of the senses, or whatever it is. And from that point of view, of course, happiness can be superficial, just like everything else in the world can be superficial. But in Buddhism, that is not really what happiness means. Happiness is conjoined with all of these other ideas. And when you understand it in connection with all these other ideas, only then do you understand what happiness really means. It is something very profound. It is something very beautiful, something that something you can understand goes way beyond the ordinary happinesses of the world. And so one way of approaching this idea of the broader sense of happiness is through the idea of freedom. The idea of freedom. It's a beautiful word, this word freedom. But before I go there, you can think of the path in so many different ways. The idea of Buddhism, it can also be considered like contentment. It's another beautiful word that we use in Buddhism very often, being contented, being at peace. Peace is another kind of way of thinking about these whole teachings. And when you look at it from all of these various ways, compassion is another way of thinking about almost the ultimate purpose of this path. The Buddha developed compassion to the highest kind of potential. Love, loving kindness, or just kindness at all, another way of thinking about this. And when you bring all of these ideas together, you get the kind of inclusive, comprehensive idea of awakening, of the purpose of the Buddhist teachings. But today I want to focus on freedom. What is it about freedom that is so beautiful? And the starting point, obviously, of why freedom is beautiful is that very often when we think about the opposite of freedom, it is like imprisonment. When you are imprisoned, that's when you are obviously not free. And imprisonment is something kind of negative. That's why we put people in prison if they've done something bad, because it is negative. Imprisonment, almost by definition, is something negative. You are constrained, you are held back, you can't do what you do. Your freedom is is not allowed anymore. Society decides that you should not be free because you're too dangerous, or whatever it is for the world around you. And so you're held back. Imprisonment is something that is terrible, something we all want to avoid. Freedom is a limitation, is the taking away of those barriers. taking away the constraints in life, taking away the things that limit us, that kind of confine us to certain places or certain things. And most of the time, we don't even know that in our daily life, in our ordinary existence, we are imprisoned in a certain way. We are constrained in a way we don't even understand. And so that prison is not just kind of going to Carnet prison farm, down the road from the monastery. That's kind of where the monks go quite regularly to teach, or whatever prison might be. Imprisonment is right here, right now. And one of the feelings when you think about your meditation is in the right way, and when the meditation goes well, is that feeling of being liberated from oppressive things. As your mind becomes calm, as your mind becomes peaceful, you are being liberated from some of these things that actually are oppressive, thoughts that are compulsive, that you can't stop, defilements of the mind that don't give you any peace. All of these things inside of us that actually imprison us and hold us back. So freedom has this beautiful idea of being liberated, broadening out the mind, getting rid of all the stuff that limits us and makes life far more miserable than it has to be. And so it's a beautiful way of thinking about the Buddhist path. And one of the famous sayings of the Buddha that has always stood out, and which many of you will have heard. I'm going to say it in a second. You will have heard this many times before. But it kind of gives this feeling how fundamental freedom is on the Buddhist path. And the Buddha says that just like the ocean only has one taste, the taste of salt, in the same way the Dhamma, the teaching of the Buddha, has only one taste, the taste of freedom. Such a beautiful thing. The Dhamma has only one taste, the taste of freedom. What does that mean? Well, it means that when you start practicing these teachings, whatever aspect of the path you take, whether even you just start out, you are a beginner, starting to come here to Dhammaloka, trying to understand what these teachings are about, every step of this path has an aspect of freedom to it. Every time you get it right, every time you think in the right way, every time you do something that leads the mind in the right direction, you experience some of that freedom right there in your life. And as you practice this path, as you take it deeper and deeper, that freedom increases, stage by stage, becoming more and more free as a human being. And if you're not a human being, you still become more free. So if you are a ghost, you are still welcome here. So welcome, ghost. You too can become more free as you as you come here. That's true, right? Ghosts can also become more free as long as they keep the 5 precepts. Then they are okay. There's a story in the suttas about this dragon that wanted to become a monk. And the dragon wanted to become a monk. And dragons, they have these powers. It's called the naga in the Pali language. They have the powers of looking like a human being. So he kind of came into the form of a human being, and I went to the Buddha and said, please, I want to become a monk. And was not the Buddha, some other person. And he said, you're sure, of course you can become a monk. They gave him the ordination ceremony, and then during the night, he was sharing a room with another monk just after his ordination. And because it was a dragon, it wasn't a human being, during the night, when it falls asleep, it goes back to its original shape. It becomes a dragon again. And so this other monk, it wakes up and there's a dragon in his little room. And he kind of freaks out and screams, because the dragons are kind of scary. So he screams, and all these other monks come running too. And they but when the time they come there, this dragon has turned back into a human being. And they say, what's going on? And he says, this monk over here is a dragon. What? Is it true? Are you a dragon? Oh, yes, actually, I'm a dragon. I apologize. I'm really sorry about that. And then they go to the Buddha, and then the Buddha says, I'm really sorry, but dragons cannot be ordained as Buddhist monks. But you can keep the 5 precepts, and if you keep the 5 precepts well, then maybe later on you can kind of become a human being, and then you can become a monk. So that means that everyone who comes here, including dragons, can come here and they can listen to the Dhamma and they can get some freedom through that. So ghosts as well, and dragons and everyone else. So this is a nice idea of expanding kind of the world, of various kinds of beings. But the idea here, is that the idea of freedom encompasses everything. whether you are human or not, or whatever it is like. It encompasses basically the whole universe. And all the Dhamma, the entire teaching of the Buddha, has this aspect of freedom to it. It frees the mind. It leads you onward in that direction. So every aspect. And it is not only the fact that all the parts of the Buddhist path have the taste of freedom, but it's also all the qualities that you build up on this path. Those qualities too have the taste of freedom. And so if you gain a little bit of peace in your meditation, if you gain a little bit of joy and happiness in your meditation, if you have a moment of compassion for the people around you, all of those aspects as well, all of those qualities too have the taste of freedom within them. If you feel happy, you are free from the suffering that was there. If you feel peaceful, you are free of the agitation and restlessness that happened to be in your mind before. If you are compassionate, you're free from the hardness of the heart that sometimes we have towards other beings and other humans. And so you are liberated from something. All these qualities that we develop on this path also come with the aspect of freedom included within that quality. And that is how this idea of freedom works. So the Dhamma is free everywhere. Everything you do on this path has the taste of freedom. Look for that aspect on the path. Look for that aspect in your meditation, because if you see it, you will start to be encouraged that you're moving in a very beautiful, a very powerful, a liberating direction, far more liberating than anything you can find in ordinary life. In the ordinary life of the world, that freedom we find on the spiritual path is not really present. Instead, we are imprisoned in various ways. I'll come back to this later on. To give you an idea what this all means, I will tell you another little story. This is not a silly story about dragon. This is a more of a meaningful kind of story. I don't know why that story about the dragon came to my mind before, but sometimes random things just occur to you. But this other story is a story of a monk at the time of the Buddha called Badia. And the story is that after the Buddha reaches his awakening, a few years later he went back to his family. His extended family were known as the Sakyans. This was a small republic in the north of India. And like everyone, you want to go back to your family and maybe inspire them, maybe give some of your family members a chance to listen to these powerful teachings, maybe giving them a chance to go forth and become monastics. So the Buddha went back to the Second Republic. And of course there's a story where he met his son, and his ex-wife, and his father was there. There's all of these kind of little stories and what happened when these things happened, when there were these meetings. And the story of the Buddha's father, who was, first of all, the Buddha's wife, or ex-wife, or whatever, girlfriend, or whatever she was, not entirely clear. But she, when she sees the Buddha come back, she says to the Buddha's son, Rahula, she says, well, go now, this is your father over there. Go and ask for your inheritance. He's become the Buddha. He doesn't have an inheritance anymore. So the Rahula comes to the Buddha, and when he asks her father, his father, who has now become the Buddha, oh, please give me my inheritance. And the Buddha says, oh yeah, Venerable Sariputta, who is kind of his right-hand monk, please ordain Rahula. That wasn't what the mother had in mind, right? She wanted some kind of maybe nice house or whatever. She didn't want him to be ordained. But of course, from the Buddha's point of view, that is the inheritance. The Dhamma is what really matters. That is what makes a person really rich. That is what kind of makes life really meaningful. So that was the real inheritance. And then the story goes on. Then the Buddha's father, the grandfather of Rahula, who had just been given to go forth, he goes to the Buddha and says, oh, please don't just ordain everyone. This is my grandson. It cuts really deep. It's really painful. When kind of the children, no, first of all, you go forth. Then your half-brother Nanda goes forth. And now my grandson Rahula goes forth. Please lay down a rule that a child gets the parents' permission before they can ordain. And so then the Buddha lays down a rule. Yeah, the Buddha always listens to everyone and takes these things on board. What are suitable for that society and suitable for that situation. And so this is kind of the lead up to this. But another thing that the Buddha does then, he inspires the large community of Sakyans, all his relatives. This is like his extended family in all directions. And almost all the families in the Sakyan Republic, these were large families, they have someone become a monk. This was before there was any nuns, it seems. So every family has at least one son to become a monk. And one of these families, one of the most prominent families, was the family of Badia. This was like the royal family. Yeah? He was said to be the next king, apparently, of the Sakyan Republic. And so he too decides to go forth. Yeah? Even though he's said to be the king, and you may think that's pretty inspiring, you are about to become the king and you decide to go forth. Well, he has really understood the Dhamma. And so he goes forth, and he goes forth with all these other famous Sakyans like Ananda and Anuruddha. You may have heard, some of you will know these names because some of you have been brought up in Buddhist countries, so you know all of these names already. And Devadatta, of course, was also one of these people going forth, and a number of others as well. And so they go forth and they do their various things, and some become stream entrants, some get amazing psychic powers. One of them becomes a scallywag. Devadatta, right, becomes a scallywag. The scallywag, there's always has to be, every story has to have a scallywag. So Devadatta becomes a scallywag. Yeah. And Badia becomes an arahant. Yeah, so Badia, this person who was a king, he becomes an arahant according to the story. Yeah. And then one day he's sitting in the forest, and he's sitting in the forest, and he's sitting there, and he's saying, "Oh, what happiness! Oh, what happiness! Aho sukhang, aho sukhang." This is the Pali for "oh, what happiness." Aho sukhang, aho sukhang. If you ever want to say "oh, what happiness" in a kind of fancy way, go say "aho sukhang." Yeah, aho sukhang, aho sukhang. It's a nice way of saying "oh, what happiness." Aho sukhang, aho sukhang. And just as he's sitting in the forest saying "aho sukhang," there it is other monks, they go past, and they look at him. What is going on with Badia sitting in the forest talking to himself? Talking to oneself usually means you're going crazy, right? So they're kind of a bit dodgy. So they kind of look at him, "Oh, yeah, this Badia." I'm not looking at you, Venerable. I just kind of, it's not nothing to do with you. You happen to be there. But so they get a bit concerned about him talking to himself in the forest, even though he's saying "aho sukhang." So they go to the Buddha and they say to the Buddha, "Oh, Badia, he's sitting in the forest talking to himself, saying, 'Oh, what happiness.' We think that he's thinking back at the palace life, when he lived in this large place, and thinking about all the joys of the palace life. And now he must be miserable sitting by himself in the forest, that's dreaming back of all those nice pleasures of the palace life." And so the Buddha says to one of the people there, he says, "Okay, please go out into the forest and ask Badia to come." So this man goes into the forest, asks Badia, the Buddha would like to see you. So Badia says yes, and Badia comes, and the Buddha asks him, "Is it true, Badia, that you're sitting in the forest saying "aho sukhang, aho sukhang"?" "Yes, sir, it is true," says Badia. And then he asks Badia, "Why are you saying this?" This is where it gets interesting. Why are you sitting in the forest saying this? And then Badia says, the reason is because now I am free. Now I am freed from all those troubles, all the hassle, all the hard work, all those issues, all the things of living in a royal family. So much to do, so many things happening, so much suffering to be a royal, And now I'm sitting in the forest, just sitting on my backside, doing nothing, crossing my legs, watching my breath, entering deep meditation. Wow, aho sukhang, aho sukhang. And this beautiful kind of idea, it's on the surface of it, it's a very simple idea. And the simple idea on the surface of this is that regardless of how good your ordinary life is, even if you are a king, it is far superior to practice the spiritual path and the Dhamma. It is far better than any kind of sensory or sensual existence in the world. That is kind of the superficial message of this idea, And this is something I think we can all relate to. Does anyone here really want to be a king or a queen? Sounds like terrible, doesn't it? It sounds absolutely awful. So exactly. So regardless, but some people think it is cool to be a king and a queen because you can enjoy, you have all of these things. But even if you think it is kind of nice, it is still very limited. It is still very narrow. Those pleasures and joys only last so long. There's lots of other problems coming with that. But there's something much deeper about this as well. And that, of course, is that even the pleasures of the royal life, even the good parts of that, where there is no stressing to get things done and all of those things, even those pleasures are shallow compared to the pleasures of the spiritual path. The spiritual path is far more interesting. The freedom that you find, not the freedom of not having to do boring things, but the freedom you experience by practicing, by living in a spiritual practice, are far more profound than the freedom you get through just enjoying the sensual pleasures of the world. It is far superior. But even beyond that, one of the most powerful things, what this Badia is saying to the Buddha, I am free from all this activity. I'm free from all this doing, because a very important part of all the craving and all the things and all the pleasures of the world is all the activity that comes with that. The feeling of importance, the feeling that this matters, the feeling of doing, and all this doing activity in life itself is very painful. Actually, just sitting down, doing nothing, not doing anything, is far superior to any kind of activity, regardless of how nice that activity may seem in the world. And this is this beautiful idea that you may have heard Ajahn Brahm talk about quite regularly. The idea of the freedom from things is far superior than the freedom of things. The freedom from doing, the freedom from involvement in the world, the freedom from the sensory experiences of the world is far superior to the freedom of desire, of craving, of involvement, of all of these things in the world. And that is ultimately what this comes down to when Badia is talking about this. So this is a beautiful story that kind of is quite superficial in a certain way, but also quite profound if you really understand what is going on there. And so this gives you an overall idea of what freedom kind of means on the Buddhist path there. So let me now come back to the addiction. I said I was going to talk a little bit about addiction here and how this fits in with all of these things. And so addiction is obviously a very problematic thing. It means that you are not free. It means that you are trapped in various kind of things. It is a very kind of painful thing in life. And one of the things to understand about addiction is that it is not, when we talk about addiction, we don't just mean addiction to drugs and alcohol, which is kind of the traditional thing that we are thinking of. Addiction takes on a much broader kind of scope, especially when we think about it from a Buddhist perspective. But even from an ordinary worldly perspective, it is much broader than that. So we talk about addiction, for example, to work. You are workaholics, or you talk about addiction maybe to entertainment, or addiction to various pleasures in the world. And all of these things, almost anything can become an addiction. If you have a kind of an addictive personality, someone who leans in that direction, it is very easy to become addicted to things. And in Buddhism, we talk about intoxications of various kinds. And those intoxications are a little bit like addictions. The addiction to, again, sensory pleasure is a very important one also in Buddhism. But it can also just be an addiction to just feeling alive or feeling young and strong and these kind of things. And then you kind of do stupid things as a consequence of these kind of addictions. So it's actually quite a broad thing. We don't want to be addicted to anything. Or maybe we do. Maybe there are certain addictions that are okay. And this is kind of one of those interesting things. Are all addictions bad? And one of the nice things about the Buddhist teachings, it is very nuanced. And so one of the things that the Buddha often talks about, he talks about overcoming desire, but there are some desires that lead to the ending of desire. There are some attachments that lead to the ending of attachments. There are certain conceits that lead to the ending of conceit. And the same way, there are certain addictions that lead to the ending of addictions. So choose your addictions wisely. That's kind of the the bottom line here, in this kind of talk. Yeah. And so this is so we need to find certain things, and these are not addictions kind of in the traditional sense, but they are things that you do with a sense of commitment, with something that really inspires you and drives you, a little bit like an addiction, but without the same kind of compulsion. And one of the most famous things that Ajahn Brahmali often talks about is the addiction to deep meditation itself. Because that is such a powerful bliss, but a bliss that leads you in the right way, leads you out of the problems, out of the suffering of the world. And for that reason, it's a good kind of addiction. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's come back again to the addiction. So how to deal with addiction in a more kind of ordinary sense, the addictions of the world that are really, really painful and difficult for people. And one of the most important things when we are dealing with addiction is not to blame ourselves if we are addicted, not to blame someone who is addicted to something. If we blame and criticize someone when they are addicted, usually it just makes it more difficult. Because if you feel blamed, then you feel maybe there's even more suffering. It is even more difficult. Or maybe you feel that if you are blamed, you feel that you should have the willpower. You should have the ability to get out of this addiction. But actually, reality isn't like that. Very often, willpower is very weak. I talked about the will here a few weeks ago and how the will, from a Buddhist point of view, the idea of free will is really just an illusion from the Buddhist point of view. That's essentially what the Buddha says in the suttas. And so if there is no free will, there is no way that you can will yourself out of addiction. And so the first step is not to blame each other, and instead to think of addiction in a different way. And one of the really nice ways of thinking of addiction is more like an illness. So if someone falls into addiction, well, actually, we should consider them like an ill person. How can we help them out of that? Did they really choose to become addicted? Probably not. Why would anyone choose to be addicted? Either they made a mistake, they kind of enjoyed something and then became an addiction, or they had a lot of suffering in their life and they chose addiction as superior to that suffering. Regardless, the right way is to kind of embrace that person, not to judge them for that, but see it as an illness. And if you see it as an illness, well, first of all, you know they didn't really choose it. And secondly, you have compassion for them, because that is what you have for someone who has an illness. And then, once you start to have compassion for yourself, once you start to see things in the right way, not judging yourself, not thinking that you're going to be able to get out of this through your own willpower, then that is the beginning of getting out of the addiction. Because that compassion, instead of being hard on yourself, instead of being judgmental and doing something which very often leads to kind of more harshness or whatever, you're taking a step back. You're saying, okay, I have this problem. Now what? What is the way out of this? And so this is a kind of first preliminary step of getting out of addiction. Never be hard on yourself if you're addicted to something. Never be hard on someone you know who is addicted to things. Then you have the beginning here. Then the second thing when it comes to addiction is to understand that very often there are underlying sufferings. That's why people become addicted. And so if there is an underlying suffering, you should ask yourself, well, what is that underlying suffering? Can we deal with the underlying problem? And if you can deal with some of the underlying problems, then of course that need to be addicted, that is reduced. And when the need to be addicted is reduced, it is easier also to emerge from the addiction itself. So try to understand why this addiction matters to you. What can you do? What is it in your life that is problematic? What is the trauma maybe in the past, the suffering that you're carrying with you? Can you let go of that? Can you have compassion for yourself? Can you do something with these problems in the past? But there is more to this idea of addiction. And one of the very important things that we need to do to overcome addiction is to find that motivation to get out of it. to see our life in a new way, to envision something else, to envision a purpose and a meaning to life that is more than we normally see. And when you see life in a broader way and you see a larger purpose to it, you envision life in a new way, it gives you a new lease of life, a new reason for living, a new reason why your life is truly meaningful. And one beautiful way of doing that is precisely through the spiritual path. And tomorrow, our president over here, Xena, she mentioned that there will be, we're going to have this book club thing. We're going to look at the book called After, and the book After is all about near-death experiences. And one of the near-death experiences explained in that book, or talked about in that book, was precisely about someone who was addicted. It's a beautiful book because it's written by one of the most famous near-death experienced researchers in the world, who has all the credentials and does this in a very scientific way. So it's done in a very, very beautiful and believable way, this particular book. But one of the stories it tells about is this man who had been addicted to illegal and legal substances, alcohol and drugs and everything, it seemed, for 16 years. It's a long time to be addicted to something. And he was at his wit's end. He didn't know how to come out of this. He had gone on all of these various retreats and all these detox things for many, many times. And basically, he had given up. He had given up on trying to get out of his addiction. And then one day, he'd been picked up by the police many times before. And one day, he was picked up once more. And he was taken to jail. Was thrown into jail to get detoxified or to stay in jail for whatever time because they found some drugs on him or whatever. And he was told that when you go to jail in your condition, because you don't get any drugs in that jail, very likely you will die from the withdrawal symptoms of those drugs. You've been on drugs for so long that when you get kind of cold turkey like that, you may die from it. And so during that time in jail, during those kind of first few days, he had a seizure. And the seizure was so severe, like a really kind of severe seizure, he on the verge of dying. He was sent straight to hospital, and kind of during this whole process, during the process of reviving him and going to hospital, he had one of these near-death experiences. And he said this was the most extraordinary experience of his life. And the first thing he said was that during this near-death experience, first of all, he experienced that freedom from the drugs for the first time in 6 years, getting rid of his body. He experienced a bliss, a joy, a happiness, a kind of peace, a sense of security that went way beyond anything that those drugs ever had done to him. If he experienced, these experiences can be full of love and light and can be very beautiful and very, very powerful. It depends a bit on your personality or whatever. But he said during that experience, he realized he would never, ever touch drugs again because he understood how he was depressing himself, kind of putting himself down by being addicted to something that didn't lead to anything good. He could see how crazy it was when he understood the larger picture of the world, what actually is achievable in the world in terms of mental states that have compassion, peace, and all of these qualities. Why am I debasing myself with these stupid things? It is not just people on drugs who experience that, but even without drugs, you would feel the same thing. Why am I debasing myself by living in stupid ways in the world, regardless of what that silly way is? And so he felt that actually this is just crazy. What am I doing with my life? And then he came out of that near-death experience. His life was saved, and he never touched a drug again after that. And now, when that book was written, was 15 years later, and now he had turned his life completely around. Didn't use any drugs, didn't use any alcohol, and instead he became a counselor to the dying, traveling around, looking up, because he knew what the experience of dying was about, moving from a life where he felt terrible, imprisoned by what was going on, moving from that to a life where he became a blessing for people around him, free of that whole thing. And that shows you the power of the spiritual path, because those experiences that he had in that near-death experiences are the same kind of experiences that everyone can achieve through spiritual practice, by living well, through meditation, through thinking in the right way, through turning your perceptions around. These things are achievable right in this very existence. And when you understand that, when you see that, it gives life a meaning that it never really had before. And so I really recommend you, whether you have an addiction or not, regardless of who you are in this world, read about some of these near-death experiences, because I guarantee it will touch you when you see that. These are ordinary people telling about their experiences, and guaranteed you will feel, wow, if this is true, and it really feels true when you read them. It's really hard to dismiss it. If this is true, it gives you gets you closer to some of these spiritual ideas, and also, of course, to the idea of rebirth and all of that at the same time. And so, how can we then do this on the spiritual path? How can we bring this idea of freedom into the spiritual path, into our practice? And I will just end up talking about a few ways we can do that in our practice, and how we can take it all the way to the highest freedom itself. And so the spiritual path often starts out with a sense of maybe faith or confidence in the teachings of the Buddha, or maybe or some other kind of spiritual practice, but here, usually the Buddha, because this is a Buddhist center. In case you didn't know, it's a Buddhist center. Yeah, anyway, it's a Buddhist center. And so you get that confidence in the teaching of the Buddha, and right away, when you gain some of that confidence, when you hear some of these teachings, when maybe you read a sutta, at that moment, when you have that confidence and you think, this is true. What the Buddha is saying about life, of course he is right about these things. I will never find true meaning by just running after craving all the time. I will never be happy if I don't live a moral life. Of course the Buddha is right about that. The moment you start to gain some confidence in these teachings, actually that is already a kind of freedom. And the reason why that is a kind of freedom is that those people who don't have this kind of confidence in a spiritual path in their life, for many of them it's like walking through a desert. It's walking through a landscape where there's nothing to drink, there's no nourishment, there's nothing to sustain you. The world is just what you see. The world is this place where people get born and die. But isn't there something more? Is that all there's to it? There's no nourishment in your life. But the moment you understand the bigger picture of things, there is something really worthwhile in this world. There's something very powerful that everyone of us can practice and move towards. That nourishment is very powerful. That is a liberation of the mind, a freedom of the mind from that dryness, from that desert, from that wilderness of the heart that doesn't really have any larger goal, that just goes through life in a way which is very kind of uninteresting and very kind of dry and doesn't really have any meaning or purpose to it. So notice this, when you start to feel that sense of confidence in these teachings, life becomes much purposeful. And I would say that is one of the greatest things about being a monastic. As a monastic, there's this incredible sense of meaning and purpose. A meaning and purpose that very difficult to find quite to the same degree in lay life, because you don't live these teachings as fully as you do when you are a monastic. And that is one of the really powerful things. It feels very meaningful. Everything you do, basically, except when you're messing around, which we try to avoid, But sometimes it happens, you mess around, something goes wrong. But most of the time, it is very meaningful and very powerful way of living. This is one of the beautiful things about the monastic life. That is one of the reasons why it is so liberating. So this is one aspect right there, just the idea of confidence in the Dhamma, in these teachings of the Buddha. The second thing, and I talked a little bit about this when I was here last time, and that is the idea of generosity. Generosity is a very important part of the Buddhist path. And I mentioned last time that one of the beautiful ideas that you find about generosity in the suttas, they talk about it as a mutta chaga. They talk about it as a vosagga, as a words that actually mean a sense of freedom, a sense of liberation, a sense of giving up. And so when you give, you are, through that act of giving, experiencing a kind of freedom right there. Because giving is the opposite of holding on to things. It's the opposite of being me and mind and clinging to things. You're opening yourself up, giving things out. That is a liberation right there. And this is one of the reasons why generosity is so beautiful, because it has that sense of freedom coming within it. At that moment, it's like you are experiencing a little bit the very purpose of the Buddhist teachings. That freedom at the moment of letting go. Please, I want to give this to you. At that moment, there's no stinginess. There's no holding back. There's no small-mindedness. There's no me and my world. There is this opposite feeling. And that is very similar to the idea of liberation that you have right there through the act of generosity itself. Then there is the idea of morality on the Buddhist path. As you become more moral, that idea of morality itself is an act of freedom. The standard way that morality is described in the suttas, one of the words that is used to describe it is buddhissa, and buddhissa means freedom, or freeing. This morality that we are practicing, this virtue we are practicing, is both a freedom in its own right, and it's also freeing. It has both of these qualities. It is freeing because morality eventually leads to something higher. So it is freeing in a sense of leading you onwards on the path. But morality itself is a liberating experience. You feel liberated when you live a moral life. And I think that's kind of obvious. It's obvious for a number of reasons. One is that you are liberated from remorse and regret. You're liberated from all those bad feelings that you may have if you don't live well. And you all know if you make a mistake, you tend to feel a bit bad about yourself. And that is the opposite of being free. You are imprisoned by those bad feelings that you have. But in a sense, it is also more profound than that. It is more profound because when you are moral towards other people, when you treat them well, you treat them with kindness, you make them feel safe. You make them feel free. They are free of oppression. They are free from someone who is lying to them or stealing from them or threatening them with violence or whatever it might be. All of that is also gone. You are giving that to the other person. And what you give to others is how you tend to feel your own life. It's a very interesting psychological idea that what we give to others or how we perceive the people in the world around us is how we also, if we give something to others and so they perceive freedom, we tend to perceive the world around us in the same way. If you give freedom to the world, you perceive the world as giving freedom to you. If you are kind to the world, you will see other people in the world as being kind to you. Because we see others as we treat the world around us. This is kind of it's a kind of fundamental, really psychological way of how we deal with things. Because we understand other people through our treatment of others. If I am kind, then I will tend to see you also as being kind to me, because we experience the world in that way. And so by being kind to others, you will feel also more kindness in the world. You will see the world as more compassionate, as more loving, as more peaceful, as more beautiful because of that. And so this is one of the ideas of the liberation, freedom coming through being a truly moral person in a very deep sense. And then you take it even higher. Then you come to your meditation practice, and this is where freedom really starts to happen and really starts to become very powerful. Through the meditation practice, we are starting to eliminate those defilements of the mind that imprison us in a very deep way. One of those imprisonments of the mind is the world of the five senses. The world of the five senses limit you. When you are right now here in the five senses, well, this is all you can see. You are limited by the scope of the seeing and the hearing and the tasting and the touching of the body. The mind is confined, trapped within that reality. When you start to become peaceful, one of the first things we do is to close our eyes. And when you close your eyes, it actually already is quite nice, because all of that busyness of the world of seeing is calmed down straight away. That already starts to feel peaceful. And the more you withdraw from those five senses of the world, the more you withdraw from the world outside, the more the mind is released from the confinements of that world. And the mind kind of expands. It becomes larger. It broadens out. It allows new perceptions of freedom, of liberty that were impossible when the mind was confined by the world of the five senses. It liberates the mind from that world. It also liberates the mind from all the attachments that come with that. And all the attachments, they come with a sense of debt to that world, because every time you are attached, there will be some kind of suffering when that attachment is broken in the future. That too is gone when you remove yourself from that world. And so the mind starts to expand. The mind starts to become mahagata. It grows great because you let go of the world of the five senses. The other defilements that are often talked about on the Buddhist path is defilements like ill will. Ill will is a terrible defilement. Yeah, when you have the ill will in your mind, the Buddha compares that to illness. You are sick when you're angry. Yeah, it's kind of good to remember that. We think, yeah, I got to be angry. No, don't got to be angry at all. Even sometimes I think certain monks tend to think, yeah, it's okay to be angry. No, of course it isn't okay to be angry. It's kind of madness. When you're angry, you are a little bit crazy. You are deluded. Yeah, you are sick. Although that's kind of what anger is about. Remember that. You're seeing the world in the wrong way. To be liberated from anger is the most beautiful thing. Your mind becomes neutral. You start to really see the world clearly. Now you can act in the best interest of other people, not when you are angry. When you're angry, you are stupid. You lose your rationality. You lose the clarity of your mind. So freedom from anger, and that is really what compassion is all about. That is what loving kindness is about, withdrawing from that anger. And that is why the Brahma Viharas, the metta, the karuna, the compassion, and these things, they are another example of the liberation of the mind, the ceto vimutti, where you overcome all of these negative qualities. The other things, very briefly, that we talk about that are the kind of the confinements of the mind are things like tiredness and lethargy. Yeah, tiredness and lethargy are actually called an imprisonment in Buddhism or in the suttas. The Buddha calls that a kind of imprisonment because when you are tired and lethargic, well, your mind is like trapped. You can't really get out of it. And the opposite mind is the mind that is energized. The mind that is, is broad and large and has clarity to it. That is another kind of freedom, the energy and clarity of the mind that you develop through the meditation. The restlessness and the agitation is another kind of lack of freedom, where you are a slave to craving, as it says so beautiful in the suttas. You are not in charge of the craving is in charge of you. The craving makes you run around. When the craving is gone, that is when you feel truly free, truly liberated. The mind becomes peaceful. The peaceful mind is a very beautiful mind compared to the mind of desire. And finally, you are liberated from the doubt of uncertainty of what is good and what is bad. Clarity about where the meditation should go, what is the next step of the path, and all of these kind of things. And as you eliminate all of these things, the mind expands. The mind gets rid of its limits. The mind has all of these beautiful qualities of joy and happiness and compassion and all of these things that arise out of overcoming the limitations of the mind. And this becomes a mind that is truly free, a truly powerful mind. And that mind is available to every one of us if I can overcome all of these limitations that hold us back. And one day you can get to the point where you too become that kind of Badia, the person who could become king, but decided instead to become a monk and found the highest happiness, not through desire, not the happiness of a desire, but happiness from desire. Because only when desire is gone, only when the desire is no longer there, can you let go of all the doing, all the activity, all the oppression of the mind, which is all this movement, all this going somewhere all the time. That is where you find the highest kind of freedom, the liberation of the mind from the doing, from the desire, from these kind of things. And this is achievable for anyone who puts their mind to it. So that is a very brief, maybe not so brief, average average talk on the idea of freedom. The understanding that there are things in the world that are really, really, really worthwhile. And each one of us, we need to overcome those addictions that stand in our way, that block us from achieving that beautiful freedom that actually is available right here, right now, on this path of the Dhamma and Buddhism. So that is all for tonight. Okay, everyone. So now, if anyone wishes to ask any questions or bring up any points or say anything, you are very welcome to do so. Eddie wants to ask. Let me see if anyone else would like to ask first, Eddie, because we shall certainly come back to you towards the end. So.
Thank you, Ajahn. That's a very good concept about freedom. I'm going through a very tough life experience at the moment, and I'm be able to view it as freedom. If I can have that every day in my mind, it's going to help enormously, and to keep peace of mind and not have anger and things like that. So that's a very helpful perspective.
Yeah,
that's
great.
All. Thank
you. Yeah, please. I can understand why people get angry when they have difficulties, because it's a very natural thing. But sometimes the idea is, the life is like this. Life is difficult, and sometimes it is just the way life is. And sometimes being able to accept things is one of those kind of other beautiful ideas in Buddhism. Because the moment you accept that this is a reality, actually the solutions start to come. The solutions is the spiritual path. The solutions are kind of living in the right way, gradually emerging from those difficulties. So I agree that it is very understandable. In fact, as this fellow I just mentioned that I was reading about, who had addiction problems, he said he felt this rage when he saw what was going on. And that rage actually eventually led him out of the problem. So so thank you for your comment. So, anyone else? Okay, there's someone at the back there, actually, just behind there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was just wondering how to kind of balance being kind and giving to others, but not having them take advantage of you so much. Okay,
so giving and being kind. So be kind and give when you feel like it. So when you feel like giving, that's when you're kind. If you feel that someone is kind of extracting it from you or whatever, don't give. Hold it back. Say, no, this is the wrong time. Sorry. Don't say don't say anything like that, because that give you in trouble. But it's nice. I noticed one of the kind of really amazing things with someone like Ajahn Brahm. I've known Ajahn Brahm for a long time, for 30 years, and I tend to sit next to him, so I know his character very well. And if he feels manipulated in any way, he won't do it. And that's very powerful, You can't really extract anything from Ajahn Brahm. He will be kind to you, but on his kind of, when he wants to be kind, not when you kind of are demanding it. So if you feel that other people are taking you for granted, okay, maybe now's the time. Don't be nasty, don't be angry in your mind. Still have compassion for them, but that is a time to hold back a little bit, because you want to have your own autonomy. And that autonomy, which gives when you want to give, is a far better way of giving than when you give just because other people demand it from you. So allow it to come from you. You want to do it. That is the right time usually. Okay. I think it's Eddie's turn. So Eddie, yeah.
Ajahn Brahmali, thanks for the really wonderful deep talk. You covered everything, Ajahn Brahmali, the Buddha was telling us that, regarding your talk today on freedom, the Buddha was telling us that we are all trapped in samsara. No? We are not free. No?
Yeah.
The only freedom we get is nirvana.
Yeah.
That is freedom. Okay. That is peace. You know. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So the thing is, that's on the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Now on the small picture, us ourselves. You know. Okay. Our freedom or what? No, Ajahn Brahm, is from our minds in it. We are not free because of our mind that thinks in a certain way. You know?
Yeah, sure.
You know the thing, not? Yeah. So the thing is if there's a problem, or say for example, the doctors tell you, there's something wrong with you, all these things. So our mind keep thinking of that thing, and we keep harping, you know, and then all this fear, all this, comes the thing, okay. Don't you think we should learn to let go, no?
Yeah.
Let go, okay, of all these things, okay, and then by letting go, we free ourselves.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
It's a question.
I mean,
a statement, is it?
Yeah. Don't you think we should learn to let? You've covered all already.
Okay.
I'm just trying to. We should let go to free ourselves.
Yeah.
You know. What do you think?
I think
let go.
Absolutely.
You know, and don't think about all these things and. I mean, depending on the level you are, whether you're from 1 to 9 or what, if you know more of the Buddha's tools, you apply this thing and you free yourself.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
From the mind, you know, the mind made up a lot of mess, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So good. So thank you, Eddie. So I think So I think I agree here.
You already covered
right.
that. Yeah.
So it's the trick is to understand how to let go. This is the kind of the trick. Yeah. And the way to let go is to develop the good spiritual qualities. These are the things that allow you to let go. So develop the kindness, develop the generosity, develop the faith, the understanding of what is going on. And as you develop those things, letting go becomes possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so we have some questions from outside. And we have a question from Indonesia. Hi, Ajahn. Hi. What can we do to get our mind free from doubt of this teaching? And how did you get yourself free from sensual craving like food and entertainment, etc.? How to get your mind free from doubt? There is a number of ways. Keep on practicing these teachings. Keep on listening to good Dhamma talks. Don't listen to those Dhamma talks that give rise to too much doubt. Find out don't have too many teachers who say too many contradictory things. Find out who you really have some confidence in and stick to a few. Otherwise, it gets too complicated sometimes. Read a bit of the word of the Buddha. Contemplate the word of the Buddha. Try to understand what is going on. Do some practice, and gradually, you will gain more confidence. And if you don't gain more confidence, well, then you don't. But at least that is the right way of kind of getting there. And at least in my life, I have found that the doubt is becoming less and less over time, and more confidence in these teachings. But it is about really understanding these things and really seeing them in your own life, how they actually work. How to become rid of sensual craving? I think the most important thing is not to worry too much about that. I don't know how far on the Buddhist path you are, but I think we tend to worry too much about overcoming sensual craving. What you should do instead is not to overstep the precepts. That's the most important thing. Don't do sensual things that go against the 5 precepts. That is the most important thing. Otherwise, enjoying life is okay. If you have some craving for food, it is no big deal. If you have a bit of craving for entertainment, it is no big deal. Make sure, rather, that you live well, that you live with kindness, that you understand what compassion is, that you have some forgiveness in your life, that you are generous. These are the important things, because if you develop those things are the things that will allow you to overcome the craving for the world. The more of the good qualities you have within you, the more kindness you have, the less will be the worldly cravings, because you have another kind of happiness that is more important. So don't try too hard. I hear people always talking about overcoming the sensual pleasures of the world, but that's often starting in the wrong end. It is starting with what is impossible. You need to start in the right end. First of all, be generous, then be kind, then start to understand some of the benefits of renunciation. This is how the Buddha teaches in the suttas all the time. Giving, then morality, then understanding the dangers in the sensual pleasures. Always get the sequence right. Okay, then we have from Richard Vaitsage, or sorry if I can't pronounce your question properly. This is from Bolivia. So hello, Richard. My mum has a cousin that is her enemy. He even put my mum in jail by false accusation. He is a scallywag. I'm glad, thank you for using that nice word. And makes me lose my faith in the law of karma. How to not lose it? The thing is that people's karma is often very complicated, and it doesn't, manifest straight away. The results of bad karma can take a long time before it manifests, and maybe he has a lot of good karma from the past. Maybe that's why he's your uncle, because he has lots of good karma. He's happy, good to be with you, Richard. Because you are a Buddhist, so maybe you are there to help him. Maybe that's kind of your mission in life, to help your uncle to see the right way. Quite likely he has some good underlying qualities, it's just a matter of finding them. And if you can't find them, well, guaranteed at some point he will have to reap the consequences of his bad actions. This is not negotiable. He will eventually reap it. And if you have a look at the sutta like the Majjhima Nikaya 136, the Maha Kamma Vibhanga Sutta, the greater sutta on the analysis of karma, you will see there the Buddha says precisely this, that karma can ripen, maybe not straight away. A scallywag can go to heaven sometimes, but eventually they will have to reap the consequences of those actions. It depends on how much of a scallywag you are. So don't be careful with judging on that kind of basis, because it is too complicated for that simple kind of judgment. What you can take it, however, is that person will tend to feel bad about themselves, just like we all feel bad about ourselves if we do bad things. Then we have a question from Chia Lin Tor. Tor. That's an interesting name. That's kind of the Viking Thor. So that's the alternative spelling of the name Thor. Anyway, Ajahn Brahmali, how does addiction to conceit free conceit? Thank you, Ajahn. Okay. So the addiction to conceit here is just the sense of identity. Any identity is a kind of conceit. And so you need to have a good identity. So your identity should be an identity as a kind person, identity as a generous person. That is much better than the identity as a kind of whatever identity, as maybe a successful businessman. That's kind of an identity which is, it's kind of neutral. It is not neither good nor bad. But a good identity is an identity as a kind person, because that encourages you to be kind. So we need a good identity. I have identity as a monk. That's kind of also a good identity. The good identity would be not just an identity as a Buddhist, but an identity as a practicing Buddhist. If you just identify as a Buddhist, sometimes that can lead to problems, because then you can clash with non-Buddhists. But if you identify as a practicing Buddhist, well, then you will have the right attitude as well. So eventually we overcome these identities as well, but in the meantime they are useful for the practice. Question from Jay. Hello, Jay. Dear Ajahn, are we all just addicted to our bodies and our low-key and durable dukkhas in this world? Yes, we tend to be addicted to the bodies, or rather more like the five senses that come with the bodies. The bodies themselves is kind of neutral, but the five senses, the touch and seeing and all of these kind of things, yes, that is called sensory or sensual addiction right there, coming with the body. And those are the things that we gradually let go of by practicing this path, and then it kind of fades away by itself over time. Okay, everyone, so very nice to have you all here. Nice to see you again, and I wish you a nice week ahead until next time we meet here at Dhammaloka Center. So now let's pay respect to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha.